I never thought the sound of a cardboard box hitting polished hardwood could echo like a gunshot in my chest. But that's exactly what it felt like that night. My arms straining under the weight of my own words. 30 freshly printed copies of The Ashes We Carry stacked inside, each one holding pieces of my family's history and my soul, only to be told they didn't belong here. If you've ever been told your voice didn't matter, or that your work had no place, hit that like button and subscribe, because what happened to me is the kind of story that makes you realize some doors are worth kicking open, even if they slam in your face first. The truth is, the evening had started with such fragile hope. I'd been invited to the local Voices night at Hawthorne Books, the city's most prestigious independent bookstore, a place where literary careers were practically minted if you managed to get a table and a signing pen in your hand. I'd worn my best dress, not flashy, just a dark green wrap that made me feel put together, and I practiced my smile in the mirror, the one that said yes, I belong here, even if I was still teaching myself to believe it. The rain had just stopped when I stepped inside, the smell of paper and fresh coffee wrapping around me like an old friend. I spotted other authors already setting up. White men with tailored blazers, white women with glossy hair and stacks of novels bearing their confident faces on the back cover. And I found the empty table with my name written on a folded cardstock sign. My hand was halfway to setting down the first stack when she appeared. Vivian, the events coordinator. She was the sort of woman who always looked like she was late for a lunch with someone important. Her silk scarf knotted with precision, her expression polite but tight. "Oh," she said, drawing the word out like a thread she didn't want to touch. "You're Naomi." I nodded, explaining I was the author of The Ashes We Carry. Her eyes flicked down to my box and back to me, and in that glance I knew something was about to go wrong. "Right?" she said. Her voice dipped in that brittle, practiced cordiality that felt more like a warning than a welcome. "I think there's been some sort of mix-up. This event, well, our customers tend to connect with different kinds of stories." The air between us seemed to constrict, pressing against my ribs. "Different kinds?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay even. "It's a literary fiction novel, multi-generational family saga," the email said. She cut me off with a quick smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Yes, but you understand, don't you? Our regulars aren't really looking for stories like that." She didn't say stories about black families navigating the scars of history, but she didn't need to. My knuckles tightened around the box. I could feel the blood rush to my ears as I noticed two authors at the next table glance over, then quickly look away. A young couple browsing the shelves had gone still, clearly catching pieces of the exchange. Vivian leaned in, lowering her voice just enough to make it feel like a secret I should be ashamed of. "Maybe try the community library. They love local initiatives." Her pause before that last word felt like a subtle downgrade, a polite shove toward a smaller stage. I swallowed hard. The smart move, the professional move, was to smile, thank her, and leave quietly. But the sound of my own silence in that moment was deafening, like I'd just stepped back into every hallway, classroom, and office where someone had decided I was too much or not enough before they knew a single thing about me. I told her I had been invited, that the event's manager, another woman whose name I gave, had confirmed my spot. Vivian's smile hardened. "Well, she isn't here tonight," and I run the floor. "I'm afraid you'll have to take these." She gestured to my box as if it were an unwelcome package on her doorstep. "Somewhere else." It was an odd, slow-motion humiliation, like being written out of the room while still standing in it. I bent down, feeling the cardboard's edge bite into my palms as I lifted the box again. That's when I heard someone chuckle, not loud, but enough to make my skin prickle. I turned just enough to see one of the blazered authors shake his head, murmuring something to the woman beside him. The small group at his table laughed under their breath. I pushed through the store's glass doors into the cool night, my reflection faint in the pain, woman, box, raincoat, and the look of someone who had been told, yet again, she didn't belong. I drove home without the radio on, letting the silence wrap itself around the anger building in my chest. By the time I walked into my apartment, the city's lights bleeding in through the blinds, I'd replayed the scene 100 times, each version sharper, my imagined responses braver than the quiet nod I'd given before leaving. I set the box on my kitchen table, running my fingers over the matte cover of my book. The title shimmered in the dim light, and I thought of my grandmother's hands, calloused and certain, teaching me that our stories were our inheritance, the only thing they could never take from us. I thought of my mother, who'd worked 2 jobs to keep me in books and notebooks, telling me that one day my words would matter to someone. The weight of those promises pressed down on me harder than the cardboard had. I poured a glass of water, sat down, and opened my laptop. I typed the whole thing out. Every word Vivian had said, every look, every pause thick with meaning, intending to send it to my best friend Jada, the only person who knew just how much this debut meant to me. My finger hovered over send for a long time before I clicked it. I didn't know then that Jada wouldn't just read it. She'd share it. And in doing so, she would light a match I didn't even realize I'd been carrying in my pocket all along. I woke up to my phone vibrating across the nightstand like it was trying to escape. For a groggy second, I thought it was my alarm, until I saw the endless stream of notifications lighting up the screen. Instagram tags, Twitter mentions, messages from numbers I didn't recognize. Jada had posted my email, not word for word, but in her own furious summary, with a short video she'd recorded last night when I called her in the car, my voice shaking as I described Vivian's exact words. She'd overlaid it with the caption, "This is how Black authors get silenced before anyone even opens the first page." It had started as a ripple. 50 likes, then 200. But by the time I sat up and rubbed the sleep from my eyes, it was a wave, thousands of shares pouring into my feed. Strangers were leaving comments like, "Drop the link to buy," and "We need this book." I scrambled to open my tiny author website and found my shop's dashboard blinking like a Christmas tree. 60 orders, then 80, then 100 in the space of an hour. My heart hammered, not just from the sales, but from the sheer force of people I'd never met insisting my voice mattered. By noon, the story had spread to Book Talk, where a creator with 100,000 followers filmed herself reading my back cover synopsis and then staring into the camera with tears in her eyes before saying, "I already know I'm gonna sob. Order this now." That video alone pulled in another flood of orders, so many that the online stores sent me an alert. Inventory low. I called my small batch printer in a panic, trying to get a rush order, my voice cracking when I explained why. The woman on the other end, middle-aged, warm voice, laughed softly and said, "Honey, I'm pushing you to the front of the line. We need these kinds of wins." But the biggest shock came that evening when I checked my email and saw a message from a Black-owned bookstore in Atlanta called Parable House. The subject line read simply, "We want to feature you." The owner, a man named Marcus, had seen Jada's post and offered to host a live-streamed author talk on their Instagram page, something they'd done for other marginalized authors who'd been pushed out of mainstream spaces. "We'll handle the marketing," he wrote. "You just show up with your story." I said yes before I could talk myself out of it, and 2 nights later, I sat in my living room, ring light glowing, copy of The Ashes We Carry in my hands as Marcus introduced me to an audience of over 2,000 viewers. They asked about my writing process, my family's influence, the years I'd spent chiseling sentences after work until my eyes ached. They asked about the bookstore incident, too, and I told the truth. Not to wallow, but to show that this was part of a bigger pattern, a system that decided which stories were universal and which were niche. The comments flew so fast I couldn't keep up. "Just bought my copy. This is my book club's next pick. We see you, Naomi." After we ended, Marcus texted me a screenshot. My book was number 12 on the regional indie bestseller list. My hands trembled as I stared at it, realizing for the first time that this might not just be a spike of sympathy sales, but the start of something bigger. And then, as if the universe wanted to make sure I understood, the emails started arriving from other indie bookstores, one in Chicago, another in Oakland, a small one in Baltimore, all asking if they could stock my book. A literary blog picked up the story, titling it "The Debut Author the Gatekeepers Tried to Hide." Within hours, Vivian herself posted a statement on Hawthorne Books' Instagram, calling the situation a misunderstanding and insisting my absence from the event had been due to logistical changes. But the internet is allergic to half-truths, and someone leaked a screenshot of her earlier email threads, condescending, dismissive lines that matched exactly what I'd told Jada. My phone didn't stop buzzing all night. I should have been giddy, but under the adrenaline was something steadier, heavier, a responsibility. This wasn't just about selling books anymore. It was about showing that the people who get erased still have the power to write themselves back into the story. So I started saying yes to everything. Podcast interviews, guest blog posts, Zoom Q&As with book clubs from Seattle to South Africa. I signed and shipped copies until my wrist ached. Wrote personalized notes to readers who shared their own stories of being told they didn't belong in certain rooms. The momentum felt like riding a wave I'd never seen coming, equal parts thrilling and terrifying. And every time I thought it might taper off, something else pushed it higher. A New York Times reporter emailed me, saying she was working on a piece about diversity in publishing and wanted to include my story. A librarian in Philadelphia messaged to say she'd added my book to their citywide reading program. And through it all, I kept thinking about that moment at the bookstore, the look on Vivian's face when she told me my story wasn't what their customers wanted. I thought about the people in that room who had heard her and stayed silent. I thought about how many others had been turned away, quietly, without a viral post to catch them. By the end of the second week, my book had hit number 5 on the national indie bestseller list, and I knew, deep in my bones, that I was nowhere near the finish line. This wasn't just my fight anymore. 3 weeks after the night I'd been told to take my book somewhere else, I stood at the back of a grand hall at the Franklin Literary Festival, waiting to be called on stage as a featured author, my name printed in bold on the program between 2 National Book Award finalists. The irony wasn't lost on me. The festival had reached out after seeing the viral posts, insisting they'd been meaning to invite me all along, but I knew better. I stepped out into the wash of warm lights, the hum of hundreds of conversations tapering into silence as the moderator introduced me. From the stage, the crowd was a sea of faces, some curious, some already smiling with recognition. And then, halfway through the Q&A, I saw her, Vivian, sitting halfway back, notebook in hand, her posture stiff, eyes locked on me like she couldn't decide whether to shrink or stand taller. The moderator asked about my journey to publication, and I felt the whole room lean in. My throat tightened for a second, but then the words came smooth and steady. I told them about the years of writing in stolen hours, the manuscripts abandoned, the drafts torn apart and rebuilt. And then I told them about the night at the bookstore, not as a revenge story, but as a truth I refused to hide. Sometimes, I said, my voice carrying to the farthest corners, the people who tell you your voice doesn't belong are the same ones who will later claim they always supported you. I write for those who've been told to make themselves smaller, and for the readers who prove we never had to. Applause erupted, rolling over me like a tide. Vivian's gaze didn't waver, but she didn't raise her hand, didn't speak. After the event, I signed books for over an hour, hands cramping as readers told me how my story had mirrored their own in ways I couldn't have imagined. A young teacher who'd been told her class of mostly black students wouldn't appreciate classic literature. An immigrant father whose poetry submissions were rejected with the note that his voice wasn't authentic enough. A white reader who admitted she'd never realized how often bias dressed itself up as market fit. By the time the last book was signed, my publicist had texted me the news. The Ashes We Carry was officially number 1 on the national bestseller chart. I stood in the quiet hallway behind the stage, my hands still ink-smudged from signing, staring at those words on my phone until they blurred. The book that had almost been boxed out entirely was now in thousands of hands across the country, with foreign rights offers rolling in. But the victory felt too big to keep to myself. 2 days later, I announced the Open Doors Initiative, a mentorship and microgrant program for debut authors from underrepresented backgrounds, funded from my own royalties. Applications flooded in from all over, writers of color, queer authors, disabled storytellers, each one carrying a spark I recognized from my own early days. Interviews and press kept coming, and in every one, I made sure to shift the spotlight outward. This was about a pattern, not just a single night in a bookstore. And then came the full circle moment. Hawthorne Books reached out, asking if I considered doing a reading there to show unity, now that I was a bestseller. I almost laughed when I read the email, but I said yes, on my terms. The night of the event, the store was packed, every chair filled, people standing shoulder to shoulder along the aisles. Vivian hovered at the edge of the crowd, her usual tight smile in place. When it was my turn to speak, I looked out at the audience, the shelves behind them heavy with stories, and said, "Every book here has the right to be seen. Every author has the right to be heard. No one gets to decide which stories matter based on who's telling them." The applause was thunderous, And for the first time, I saw Vivian's expression crack, not with anger, but with something closer to understanding. Afterward, she approached me, her voice low. I mishandled that night, she admitted. I've been thinking about it ever since. I nodded, not to absolve her, but to acknowledge the truth in her tone. Change didn't happen in a single apology, it happened in what came next. And what came next, for me, was bigger than I'd dared dream. An adaptation deal for a streaming series, book tour dates across the country, and a growing community of writers and readers who refuse to accept invisibility as the price of entry. The night I hit #1, I sat alone in my apartment with a glass of wine, looking at the original box of books I'd carried into Hawthorne, the one Vivian had told me to take somewhere else. I'd kept it, unopened, as a reminder. Now, I slit the tape, lifted the lid, and held one of those untouched copies in my hands. I thought about every room I'd been told I didn't belong in, every moment I'd doubted whether my words would ever find a home. And I thought about the people who'd lifted my voice when someone tried to shut it down. The arc had bent, not by accident, but because enough people refused to let it stay crooked. I signed that copy with a simple message. For the one still knocking, kick the door down.